So you can see how the floor was hacked up. It's probably hard to tell in the video without really zooming in, but this area was cut out, and then they've literally taken pliers and they've bent a lip around this area. So this is pretty bent up. They cut this metal with like a torch. So it's pretty jagged, pretty rough. So rather than trying to work with these edges, and I mean this is really bent up in here, a lot of stretched metal, I'm just going to cut all of this out and clean it all up. Use my cutting wheel to just cut straight, smooth lines, clean all this area up, cut this completely out. This piece needs to be bent back pretty much straight up and down to clear the shifting linkage. I'm just going to cut it off from here forward. This bracket is for the seat. It's interesting, there was just 2 bolt holes for mounting the seat, and you'd slide it forward and mount one bolt hole, slide it back, mount the other. This had gotten a lot of stress over the years, and it was cracked and broken. The back was also bolted on. That was still in place. Again, 2 holes for positioning. So this seat was not adjustable. You didn't slide it forward or back for a guy with short legs or long legs. You took out a bolt, you moved it back, you put the bolt back in. But like I say, this one was broken. This was barely just sliding around inside. The whole seat moved. Yeah, it didn't have a lot of miles on it, but it had a lot of use from being in parades. Short runs, people climbing in and out of it, jumping in and out of it, making balloons, blowing off the cannon. Now's the time where I got to do a lot of planning as to what seats I'm going to use, what back seat I'm going to use. I'm not going to go back to the original rear seat. I've only been able to find a couple of them. They're outrageously expensive. I'm looking at $1,000 for a frame with rusty springs, and it's just not a very good seat. It's just pipe, frame, and some real lightweight springs. So I'm just going to go custom. I'm not going to spend $1,000 on an original seat when I can do something really, really nice for a lot less in a frame. I could also buy a completely finished seat for $2 grand. Then I don't even have to do anything but mount. So now is the time. I definitely need to figure that all out before I get all of this floor coated and painted and then end up having to go back and drill holes. Same thing with the firewall. There is a ton of holes that they drilled in this firewall that I want to cover up. So that's something I need to do now too. I want to know where everything is that I'm going to mount. Am I going to put heating and air conditioning in it? Where is all my wiring going to go for the fuel injection system, the electronic distributor? All those things I want to mount out of sight. I want to mount them all in here. Where am I going to mount them? What holes do I need? This is where the shifter was for the column shift. So that's got to all be changed. So those are a lot of things that have to be considered now while you're working on something that is completely different from the way it was originally intended to be used. So when it comes to doing hot rodding, there's a lot to consider. I'm changing the steering column. The original steering column I got rid of. The steering was terrible in these original steering, worm gear steering. So I'm modernizing all of that, rack and pinion, a steering column. I'm going to have it with a tilt. Building a new dash. I'm going to get rid of most of this. So yeah, start with the floor. So as I mentioned, my linkage is right here. This needs to be bent up to clear that linkage. There's a brace right here. Fortunately, that brace braced the floor, the body mount, over to here, and then is flattened out and just has a little bit of a lip in this area. So that's going to be easy to bend back, and it'll still keep that reinforcing. This area then will have to be tweaked and bent, and we'll have to play with that so I can meet all of these back together and re-weld them. This is where the original gas pedal was mounted. I'm pretty sure I can keep that in the same position. It was angled quite a bit. With the body almost in place, I lowered it down to where I can see everything around it. The linkage is just a little too close. I bent this out a little bit, but it needs to go a little bit further. The bell housing is really close to the firewall. So I'm comfortable with all this. I just need to trim it, clean it up a little bit. Where the shifter goes, I didn't want to cut this out yet until I actually had everything lining up with the body on. So I didn't have to cut too much of this. There's a floor brace that comes across right in the middle of this. Well, unfortunately, my shifter, it needs to come in on the edge of that brace. I don't want to cut that brace. I want to be able to keep it intact. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to cut this part of the floor out, move it forward so I can save these ribs and that brace. This brace goes all the way across side to side for the seat mounts and the body mount, but it's actually in 3 pieces. So it works out perfectly that if I cut it here, cut this off, move it forward, I'll be able to reinforce all this area again, because there is a 2-piece brace here, and then there'll be 2-piece brace there, and then this will be in between them. So that should stiffen all this up really nicely. So now I just need to figure out exactly where to cut it. It'll be cut about here, and I'll probably just go ahead and leave this edge. I might end up cutting this rib, but for now I'll just cut this out. So I just need to get an exact measurement, because there's only about this much room between those 2 panels for the reinforcing. So I don't want to really cut into that reinforcing if I can avoid it. Now that I've got it settled down where it needs to be, this firewall is just too tight. So I'm going to have to open this up a little bit more. It's hitting on both sides of the transmission here. But I am clearing the ship linkage now. Still a little too close, so I need to bump it that way a little bit more. So by cutting this piece out with that added brace, now I can move it forward, and that'll weld in right there. This seal then will come around it, and then once I patch this in, then this will seal the way the Mustang does, and then all I have to do is make another piece similar to this, goes over the transmission, and then an area for the bell housing. And those I'll just have to hand fabricate. So you can see now that I've repurposed this piece. Cut it out here, moved it up here. This piece is a little tight, but it's just a matter of notching that out, and then I'll bring a U-shaped piece in here, rolls down each edge so it'll have this same factory look. Come along. So I picked up some sheet metal to patch in, and the original factory stamping has this lip on it, about a 1/4 inch lip. I'm going to do the same thing around this. give it that professional stamp look. So in order to work this out, a lot of times I'll use cardboard to make patterns, but since this piece will easily come in and out, I'll make this shape and this cutout with this off, and then I can test fit it as I trim everything up and get it close. I want this radius to be the same as, I've got this piece of exhaust tubing that I can bend that around and mimic this same curve. I'll just file this top edge off and get it all to the same level, and then these corners cracked, so just weld that in a little bit with my MIG welder. I can clean that up nicely. So as I'm tacking this together, I'm finding that this angle isn't quite right and it's binding up. I need to open this up a little bit right now. Well, let's see how this fits now. Well, this is looking where I want it on this side. I need a little tweaking on this side, but I do that with grinders and cutting wheels and the like. So I'm going to go ahead and tack this into place. And then, well, before I do that, I'll trim this off first. Alright, I've got this side all fitted nicely. I cleaned up all of this area on the inside so that I don't have to go back underneath and get that, even though I will go back underneath there and clean things up, but make it easier to clean that area up. So I'll just work my way around this with tack welds to here, and then I'll have to use my die grinder to just slice and dice and trim and then work my way around. I'm underneath the back end of the car now, and this is where I need to plan for my gas tank. And the filler neck on the new tank actually is about right here. The filler neck to the car is over here, so I'm going to have to make kind of a Z-bend here, which shouldn't be a problem. They're not that far away. This bracket and this bracket are the original tank brackets. This one is positioned right. That one is positioned too far over to the right side of the car. So that will have to be moved, or maybe I'll make a bracket that goes all the way across, and then I can mount anywhere on this side for the tank. The front bracket, that one would need to be moved over if it weren't for the fact that it's in the wrong spot completely. The original tank was about 22 inches wide. The new tank is another 6 inches, maybe even 7 inches wider. So this piece needs to be moved back this way. This is where I was hoping my exhaust would come up and down through and around the tank off to the ends of the tank. So I'd have kind of an S-bend here. Well, that's going to put the tank too close. There's not enough clearance right here in this area for my exhaust. So I had been planning on possibly doing my exhaust right in through here, and that's probably what I'm going to have to stick with. I was a little concerned about clearance around the four-link suspension, and that might still be an issue. So I'm going to have to lay on my back under the car for a while So really playing this out. But one thing I'm finding out that I wasn't expecting, that bar, that's the upper bar for the four-link suspension, is actually hitting the belly of the body. So where that comes across, there should be a pretty good gap right there. In fact, that gap should be the same following the frame. So I'm going to have to modify this floor right in this area. Whether I use a radius piece, we'll see how it actually falls in line with everything up above, but I'm probably just going to have to cut this whole area out and follow that frame as much as possible. Something like that. So that's going to be a little bit of fabricating that I'm going to have to do that wasn't expected. And then I'll jump up on top and show you how that's going to affect inside of the Jeepster. So this is the area we're looking at underneath. Right about in here is where I'm going to have to modify that floor. And I could just bring this out on an angle here. It would just come up, come across, and then we just have a step. And that literally is a step to the back seat. That's the back seat area. That's the front of the lower part of the back seat. So this is where your feet are. And then this would be about the back end of the front seat. So I'm not losing a whole lot there. And it is just a small step. Alright, well, I've done about all I can do now with all of this area. With the body still on the chassis. I'm going to have to take the body off so I can work both sides of this, but I've got it roughed out really well. I ended up grabbing this piece from the project the last guy did back in the 70s. It's some decent metal. It might have even been the original Hump that was in here, because it did have undercoating on the back side of it. So what I did is I just kept trimming it down and modifying this edge and bending it with some vice grips and bumping it with a hammer and dolly. You can stretch areas that you want to contour. You can shrink areas. It's kind of tough, but pinch it together. Now, if you've got the pleasure of shrinking tools and stretching tools, that's wonderful, but I don't, and probably most of you don't see the need to buy something like that if you're just doing a project like this in your garage. So you can do it with just a hammer and dolly. This is all crooked, of course, but once I get everything mocked up and I kind of get it tacked in there where I want it, then I'll just cut across. This has got an overlap here, probably a couple inches. So I'll just cut straight across that, and it'll give me a perfect cut line so that I can butt weld. And yeah, the last guy, he overlapped. He had a flange here, and he overlapped it, and he screwed it in, and he filled it full of caulking. You can do that, especially if you're building a race car or something. You just want to throw it together and make it safe with a roll bar and tie all these things together and get to racing. But if you want something a little bit nicer, some smoother contours, not just straight rough cut edges. Rough cut edges are quick and easy. Just bring them together and weld them, overlap them, spot weld them. But I like to do a butt weld. I like it to be almost seamless. And if you're really good at your welds and you're really good at finishing, you can make them disappear. So it looks like a continuous piece of metal. I prefer doing that, especially on body panels. I don't like lap joints, and if it's going to be a car you're going to drive, you don't want moisture getting into those laps and into some of those areas. Even if you'd use a good body seam sealer, which I would do absolutely if there's any areas where I have any overlap, to seal out moisture so you don't get any rust creeping in behind those panels. So like I say, for now, this is about all I can do with the body still on the chassis. Once I get the body off, I'll be able to work this a lot easier where I have access to both sides. Finish all these areas up, bumping them, moving them around, getting everything perfectly smooth the way I want it, and then I'll finish burning it in, grind it all down smooth. Got a lot of other areas like these holes that I want to fill in, so I'll do that too while I've got the body off. Fill all the holes on the firewall. Don't know what holes I'm going to need, so get rid of all of them, and then I'll burn or cut new holes as needed. Same with the floor. There's a lot of holes that are drilled in it, aren't necessary. I will weld over all those holes, grind them all down smooth, make them disappear. A few bends and dents I still need to finish, and then the underneath side of this is ready to paint. Once I get that painted, the body will go back on permanently. So pretty exciting. If you like what I'm doing, give me a like. Really appreciate it. Leave me a comment. Love hearing from you. Subscribe if you haven't. Thanks again. Goodbye for now.